So, what if I told you that every illness, from a simple cold all the way to cancer, wasn't a mistake? What if it was actually a meaningful biological program kicked off by a specific emotional shock? Well, today, we're diving into German New Medicine, a radical theory that flips our entire understanding of disease on its head. All right, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the personal tragedy that started it all. Then we'll unpack the 5 biological laws that form the core of the theory. From there, we'll get into its most controversial idea, rethinking cancer. And finally, we'll look at what the GNM paths to healing actually involves. You know, this story of German New Medicine, or GNM, doesn't start in a lab or a research facility. It starts with a sudden, heartbreaking personal tragedy, one that would spark a revolutionary and, yeah, pretty controversial new way of looking at the mind-body connection. This right here, this quote from GNM's founder, Dr. Hamer, it's the bedrock for everything else. The fundamental idea is that disease isn't some random accident. It's not just bad luck or bad genes. It's a direct and, he claimed, predictable result of our deepest psychological experiences. See, for Dr. Hamer, this wasn't just a theory. It was his life. After the immense out-of-the-blue shock of his son's death, Hamer, a man who'd always been healthy, was suddenly diagnosed with cancer. For him, there was just no way that was a coincidence. It ignited this huge question in his mind. Could a specific emotional trauma trigger a very specific physical disease? He gave this critical moment a name, the Dirk-Hammer syndrome, or DHS for short. And you've got to understand, this isn't just your everyday stress. This is a shock that catches you completely off guard, something you feel totally alone with. The theory is that this shock hits 3 levels all at the exact same time: your psyche, a specific measurable spot in the brain, and the organ that corresponds to that part of the brain. This 3-level impact is absolutely central to GNM. So, how does this one single event, this DHS, become a whole system for explaining every disease? Well, the answer lies in what Dr. Hamer laid out as the 5 biological laws, a set of rules he believed are behind every single illness we experience. You can think of these 5 laws as the operating system for the whole theory. They basically map out the entire life cycle of what GNM calls a biological program, from that first shocking moment all the way through to the final phase of healing. The first law, which he called the Iron Rule, pretty much makes what we just talked about official. It says that every single thing we call a disease is actually one of these significant biological special programs, and every single one is kicked into gear by that initial intense conflict shock, the DHS. Now, the second law is where things get really fascinating. It suggests that every one of these biological programs plays out in 2 distinct phases. But here's the catch. You only get to the second phase if you resolve the conflict. You start in a cold, stressful phase, and then you move into a warm, recovery phase. Let's just look at the difference here. The conflict active phase, that's your body on high alert. You're stressed, you've got cold hands, you can't sleep, you're losing weight. But as soon as you solve that problem, that conflict, a switch flips. Your body enters the healing phase. And this is the part we so often mistake for being sick. You're exhausted, you're warm, you might run a fever, and you get all that inflammation and swelling that tells you deep repair is happening. Okay, the third law gets a bit more technical, but stick with me here. It connects our body's reaction all the way back to how we developed as an embryo. The claim is that how an organ responds to a conflict is basically hardwired. Depending on which embryonic germ layer it grew from, you can think of these as the 3 master blueprints for all tissues. It will either add cells and grow a tumor, or it will lose cells and ulcerate. And here's a simple way to look at it. According to GNM, tissues that are controlled by the old brain, our ancient survival-focused part, react to conflict by growing. They add cells, they make tumors. These are usually tied to basic survival conflicts. On the other hand, tissues controlled by the new brain, the more modern evolved part, do the opposite. They react with cell loss, with ulceration, and these are often linked to more social or territorial conflicts. All right, get ready for another radical idea. The 4th law takes everything we've been taught about germs and turns it completely upside down. It says that microbes, yep, fungi, bacteria, even viruses, they aren't the bad guys. They're actually our allies, our ancient partners, and our brain activates them specifically to help us heal. So in this model, microbes have very specific jobs. Fungi and their relatives are like nature's cleanup crew, breaking down tumors that aren't needed anymore once a conflict is over. Meanwhile, bacteria and viruses are the construction workers, helping to rebuild tissue that was lost during the conflict phase. But the crucial part is this. GNM says they are only active during that second warm healing phase. And finally, the fifth law. This is the one that ties it all together, the real punchline of the whole theory. It redefines disease itself. From the GNM perspective, there really are no diseases. There are only significant biological special programs. They're not mistakes, they're not malfunctions, they are ancient, meaningful survival programs designed to help us cope with and resolve life or death conflicts. Okay, so building on these 5 laws, GNM presents its most challenging and, frankly, most controversial ideas. This is especially true when it comes to its total rejection of the conventional theory of how cancer spreads. And here is where the two models just completely collide. The conventional view of metastasis says that cancer cells break off, travel through your blood or lymph, and set up shop somewhere else. GNM says, nope, that doesn't happen. It argues that what we call metastases are actually new secondary cancers caused by brand new conflict shocks, often the sheer terror of getting a cancer diagnosis or a grim prognosis. Now, to challenge that standard model, GNM proponents ask some pretty simple questions. If rogue cancer cells are floating around in the bloodstream, why don't we screen donated blood for them? And if they're traveling in our veins and arteries, why isn't cancer of the blood vessel walls one of the most common cancers there is? GNM suggests these questions point to a major flaw in the whole metastasis theory. So, if a disease is really just a biological program running its natural course, then what in the world does therapy look like in GNM? The entire goal shifts. It's not about fighting your body anymore, it's about understanding and supporting it. The whole therapeutic approach really boils down to one thing: finding and resolving the original conflict shock that started the whole program. The belief is that once you do that, your body will automatically and naturally shift into the healing phase. The GNM process is really a kind of roadmap. It starts with some serious detective work. You've got to identify that original shock. Then, the focus becomes finding a real-world, practical solution to that conflict. And this next step is critical. You prepare for the healing phase, understanding what symptoms are coming so you don't panic and create a new shock. And finally, you just support the body as it does what it's designed to do. Ultimately, support in GNM means creating the best possible conditions for the body to heal itself. And a massive part of that is just getting rid of fear by understanding what's happening. It also means using medicine sometimes, but strategically, to manage serious complications like swelling in the brain, while never forgetting to trust that the body is running an intelligent program with a purpose. And that really brings us full circle, back to the core philosophy, all wrapped up in this one quote from Dr. Hammer, the idea that nothing nature does is a mistake. What we've been taught to fear as disease is, from this perspective, just an ancient, meaningful program that is working exactly as it should. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question to think about. Look, whether you see German new medicine as a life-changing breakthrough or a dangerous theory, it forces us all to ask, what if the real key to our health isn't just about fighting our bodies, but about finally learning to understand the stories they're trying to tell us?